here again. I'm seeing some faces I don't recognize, which is very exciting. Today is Transfiguration Sunday, the last Sunday after the Epiphany. We call this a kind of a transition Sunday or a hinge Sunday, meant to turn our focus from this season of Epiphany and Jesus revealing himself and telling us kind of how he wants us to live, particularly as we walk through the Sermon on the Mount. And this is a bridge that we are crossing today to Ash Wednesday, 3 more days, and the beginning of Lent. And at the end of Lent, of course, the glorious feast of Easter. The first 3 of the Gospels are called Synoptic Gospels, which means that they are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because synoptic means seen together. And they all 3 kind of tell the same stories of Jesus, and all 3 of them tell the story of the Transfiguration, kind of underscoring its importance to the early church. When I was growing up, I was taught that Transfiguration was important because it revealed on this mountain, it revealed Jesus' divine nature, and it was showed that he was more important than the law and the prophets, Moses representing the law and the lives of the prophets. And it anticipates his resurrection. As I think about this event, I really wonder, did it really happen this way? Well, maybe yes, and maybe no. The point of the Transfiguration is that it was a life-changing event for those disciples, and then as generations after Jesus died and rose again and ascended, the early Christians talked about it over and over. It helped them to understand who Jesus was and who they were called to be. Our phrase, mountaintop experience, references this story, as well as Moses' encounter on Mount Sinai. Until the Transfiguration happened, Peter and his fellow disciples had experienced Jesus as a leader, a healer, a teacher, a storyteller. His face, his mission, his voice were all familiar to them, familiar and safe. And then one day on this mountain, the unimaginable happens. Before their very eyes, Jesus changes, becoming both fully himself and fully unrecognizable. The man that they think they know is suddenly other, something else. And the path that lies ahead of him, a path that must end on another high mountain, a place called Golgotha, upends everything the disciples think they understand about Jesus. Our text begins 6 days later. Later than what? In the previous verses in Matthew's Gospel, Peter has responded to Jesus' question about, who do you think I am? And Peter says, oh yeah, I know, you're the Messiah. And then Jesus says that he's going to face trials and tribulations and death in Jerusalem. And Peter says, yeah, actually has a meltdown. He says, no way, no way, no way. And then Jesus rebukes him and lays out a hard road for disciples of every generation. If any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. So the 6 days later is following what Matthew has just recounted. Perhaps because of the hard words Jesus has spoken about what lies ahead, he takes his closest friends, Peter and James and John, up this hill, up this mountain, and something amazing happens. Jesus, knowing what he will face down the road and wanting to give the disciples something to sustain them through the dark days ahead, allows them to see him in a way that they'd never seen before. to witness a glorifying change that they would never forget. There's a dazzling light, and suddenly these two figures appear with Jesus. The experience so startles Peter, he says, "Master, it's so wonderful to be here. Let's stay forever. I'll build 3 houses and we can live happily ever after." But the cloud cuts him off, and the disciples realize that they are in over their heads. And then a voice confirms that this is God's Son, the Beloved, and they're told to listen to him. That means to pay attention to what Jesus says and does, to whom he reaches out, to those he gives attention and help. We too are called to listen to him when he says things like, "Meet all whom you encounter with love and acceptance. Don't let the least of those people around you be without. No one should go hungry or be thirsty or go naked or be alone. Be like children in your openness to joy and life. And don't let there be any outcasts. Every person matters." The church's hope for remaining alive and vibrant in our own age rests on this belief, our knowledge that Jesus still speaks to us, and the instruction to listen to him still applies to you and to me. Part of this listening includes not only doing what Jesus calls us to do, it's also telling others about it. It's not enough for us to be open to encounters with the living God, which I do believe God wants for all of us. We can witness to the action of God in our lives. We can tell people that God still works in the world in 2023. You know, Episcopalians are often called God's frozen chosen because we are reluctant to tell others about our faith, reluctant to invite others to church, reluctant even to speak of issues of faith to one another. My colleague Debbie Thomas reminds us that, you know, we Episcopalians value these things called inclusiveness and hospitality and openness, but we rarely invite others to worship into the community. I mean, we have a whole lot of reasons for not doing so because we don't want to be pushy, and you know, Episcopalians are always very polite, and we don't want to be identified with Bible thumpers, and we know that we don't have a monopoly on spiritual truth. At the same time, our earliest Christian ancestors lived and died in the hope of offering the world an invitation to radical, transforming, healing love. Love grounded in Jesus' death and resurrection and lived in community. The good news Jesus personified was really news. It was something new. That God loved and loves everyone who has ever lived. God so loves the world. It was something to share and something to proclaim. What have you and I come to cherish about the life of Jesus? About the life of faith? About God's love lived out here in Stamford? I'll bet each and every one person here has a story that can talk about God's love in their lives. I'll bet each of us has had an experience, a profound encounter with the living God that we might share. I am aware that you, as a congregation, have extended invitations to your neighbors. Sometimes they've been acknowledged, sometimes not. But at the same time, the best invitation one could give to another is face-to-face, one-to-one. And I also know, because I'm guilty here, that speaking about faith is difficult, or at least needs some practice. I would suggest that at coffee hour today, or next week, or the week after, that we take some time talk to somebody we know, somebody that isn't going to laugh at us or we're not afraid of, but talking about our faith and what belief in Jesus the Christ means to us and how it has impacted our lives. Like everything else, like how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Well, it's the same thing. Talking about our faith needs practice, but it will get easier as we do. What if we share the good news with a view to understanding how God is alive and well in all people and all things? When Jesus began to preach, he announced that the kingdom of heaven is within you. And he was speaking to people who were oppressed and subjugated by the empire. Our lives are easier and freer, but the world still needs justice and liberation and healing and wholeness. There are lots of people in our midst who are starving for it. And you and I are the ones who can deliver it. Unless we think we can't do this, hear the words of Nelson Mandela at his inaugural address. He said, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us." He goes on, we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant or gorgeous or talented or fabulous? Actually, who are we not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. And it's not just in some of us, it's in everyone, he said. As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fears, our presence automatically liberates others. For which I say thanks be to God.